Although not always fun, exciting, or thrilling, Frieren Beyond Journey's End is a special story. In this video, which is the combined completed work of my last 3 videos, I am going over the entire work, from the storytelling to the deeper emotions and themes that make this seemingly boring anime into something much, much more. Despite being slow and having a relatively simple plot, Frieren is undoubtedly a masterpiece in my eyes. There are 3 important aspects to why this story is a masterpiece, and we are starting with the one main aspect that made it that way. Frieren Beyond Journey's End is written around a central idea that is the soul for the entire work. The concept of an elf who outlived her heroic adventuring party and decides to make more meaningful connections to the humans around her because of that is this incredible concept. Specifically, her relationship to the leader of her previous party is what ties everything together, from her relationships with those around her to the events that happen in each day of their current journey. This is what also builds the themes, the ideas of connections, lifetimes of individuals, and what hit me the hardest, dealing with distant loss. However, that is for a later section of this video series. Although this soul and these themes play into it, none of these are the single aspect that made Frieren a masterpiece. While the themes, main plot, and characters are beautifully written, the thing that really made this special is how, despite this being a very chill story with few major conflicts and little excitement, every small moment in interaction matters. With most of the story consisting simply of conversations and doing day-to-day tasks such as shopping, it's important that there is something more than just interesting character interactions to keep you engaged through the mundane. But after only a few episodes, you realize the mundane is much deeper than you think. Surprisingly, this story is very tightly written, with so many little details that are remembered in later episodes. The first example of this that I noticed is when Fern mentions the useless spells Frieren had learned. One removes rust from a bronze statue, and another turns sweet grapes sour. Both of these just seem like examples to show how much Frieren loves magic, that she'll learn a spell regardless of its usefulness. But there is so much more to this side remark, setting up some really powerful moments and enriching the story. Frieren herself is a very distant and closed-off person, especially at the beginning of the story. It's hard to connect to her, and you never know what she is thinking. However, this is by design. Whenever she does reveal her feelings, it's a beautiful moment, in large part because of the small details that set it up, like her knowledge of these simple spells. Although her obsession with learning interesting spells was spurred on by an old companion, which is the most obvious reveal from this situation, these 2 specific spells are also brought up again in smaller ways that end up being just as meaningful. Her hero party had many statues erected during their travels. To honor the memory of her friends, she often cleans the now very old monuments, and if they are made of bronze, she simply has to use that spell. As for the grapes, we learn about the favorite foods of those in the hero's party in a later flashback. Among those were sour grapes. Reuniting with his friend, who also has a long lifespan, she is able to put the spell to use in a 2-second clip during a montage. Small details like these appear everywhere within the story, and rewards you for paying close attention. This isn't anything new or mind-blowing in the realm of fiction, but it's uncommon to see for these kinds of chill, low-action, low-tension vibe shows. Most of the story is about the interaction of the characters, and the small adventures they have when they stop at a town for supplies. It would have worked as a chill slice-of-life story without putting in the effort of having these small and extremely meaningful moments all throughout the series. If I was only looking hyper-analytically at the writing itself, I would say this attention to detail is the one main thing that sets this apart. However, the true single aspect within this story that has made it not only great, but among my favorite anime of all time, before even finishing its first season, is the heart that the author put into this. Frieren Beyond Journey's End has affected me in a way few stories have. It's sad, funny, and melancholy, but it never feels like it was forcing these emotions. It simply told the story of these characters in this world. It seems there is very little known about the author, Kanhito Yamada, but from this work it is clear she is someone who has a deep, personal understanding of emotions and people. There is a depth to this story beyond its interesting look into the perspectives of time and loss. Although much of Frieren is about lamenting lost time with those who had been close to you, there is so much more than it just being a sad story. This anime is extremely immersive in its storytelling, to the point it feels like the author herself also lives among these characters and is simply compiling the most interesting parts of their story. I don't particularly like a story that is built around making you like a character and then killing them off or having some other tragedy affect them to make you feel sad. This anime isn't like that at all. Frieren is a look at life from the perspective of an immortal elf. And life is often sad, but it's also beautiful and funny and exciting. All of these things are shown, which is why it seems to change genres in different arcs of the story. But within each of those genres is the heart of the author, about reflecting on the memories of the past and enjoying the blessings of the present. All is shown through deeply human characters who are written with so much emotion and depth beyond just the technical mastery of writing. It's impossible to fully explain or analyze this beautiful aspect. The only way to understand what I'm talking about is by watching the series. This heart, the real emotion poured into the story, is the true single biggest aspect that has made this a masterpiece in my eyes. Next, I want to treat it as the author seems to and go deeper into its world instead of analyzing it as a written work. There are many fascinating concepts and ideas Frieren explores, one of them being about the weakness of immortality. Although many fantasy and sci-fi series deal with the concept of immortality, I have never seen such a nuanced and interesting look into the topic before watching Frieren Beyond Journey's End. With the main character being an immortal elf, we get a personal look into the life of one who doesn't die. While the desire to live forever has been a part of humanity since forever, Frieren shows that being immortal in a mortal world isn't necessarily a good thing. No matter how much time you have, a life without meaningful connections is dull and empty. The first example of this is in the beginning of the story. Frieren is a distant, closed-off person. To her, a human's life is like an annual flower. What's the point of getting attached to it when in a mere 60, 80 years they'll be gone? 100 years isn't a long time for Frieren, so the 10 years she spent with the hero's adventuring party didn't mean much to her at all. At least, that's what she originally thought. After the party defeated the Demon King, Frieren leaves to collect more spells. Before this, she promised to be back in 50 years to view the next meteor shower in a better location than what they got in the city. The meteor shower is a perfect visual for how Frieren feels about humans at this point. The rocks quickly burning up in the atmosphere are beautiful, but don't last long enough to have any real meaning. Despite this, she still promises to come back and see them again. 50 years later, Frieren returns and does what she promised. Shortly after this, Himmel, the leader of the party, who we learn through later parts of the story had a very special relationship with Frieren, dies. She doesn't show any expression during the funeral, but when burying the casket, Frieren's grief finally overtakes her. However, it's not only grief, but regret. While crying over the loss of her friend, Frieren realizes that she was wrong. The short length of a human's lifespan didn't mean she should be distant and not hold a meaningful connection to them. It was the exact opposite. Because of the short length of human lifespan, she should even more so cherish the time she had with them. This is the first point that Frieren teaches about immortality, and it's a very profound truth about life. Time is limited, not just for you, but also those around you. So enjoy what you get in each moment with those you love. All of this is summed up in the most powerful line Frieren delivers in the first episode. Why didn't I try to get to know him better? This is the most relevant real-life lesson and theme Frieren has regarding immortality, but there are many more fascinating ideas on this topic explored through each episode. Many philosophers consider immortality to be bad for you, that you will have no focus for your life because you have infinite time. In this hypothetical concept, there is literally no consequences for procrastination, because you always have tomorrow. The idea that pending death brings urgency and meaning to life is explored in many fantasy and science fiction works, but none of them that I've experienced capture it in the way Frieren has. The interesting way the fantasy genre shows this is through characters with long lifespans that do things very differently than regular mortals. Lord of the Rings has this with elves, and with the very, very, very slow Ents. there is no reason to rush things, because 100 years from now is a blink of an eye to an elf or an ancient tree. In Frieren, we see that because of dedication, patience, and focus, elves will learn mastery, but because of their limited life, humans know efficiency. This leads us to Fern, her introduction being another interesting look into the way Frieren thinks about time. Heiter tricked her into staying with him and his adopted daughter for several years so that Fern could train to be competent enough to protect herself on Frieren's travels. While a few years isn't much time at all for Frieren to spend deciphering an ancient book on the request of a friend, for Fern, it's a deadline. She has to be competent enough to stay with the only person she has any relationship with, and she improves very quickly, becoming a skilled mage and building a relationship with Frieren. Continuing their journey together, Fern creates an urgency for Frieren in each small adventure they have. She is a constant reminder to her master to not get caught up in the endless tasks of life and prioritize what's important. Although she doesn't express this directly, she helps Frieren prioritize her goals instead of getting caught up in minor tasks that leave her regretting not caring more about those around her. This all leads up to the biggest moment where we are shown the most obvious weakness of Immortality. During the demon infiltration arc, where Frieren faces down Aura the Guillotine, in one of the most satisfying battles I've ever seen, another fight takes place between Fern and Lugner, one of Aura's subjects. While Lugner is more powerful and has lived much longer, Fern was trained by Frieren specifically to kill demons. But more than that, her victory came from the speed and urgency Fern had to kill him. With the constant volley of attacks from Fern, Lugner decided a battle of attrition was his best strategy. Be defensive and wait for Fern to exhaust her mana. This was a major mistake. Fern had been suppressing her mana specifically to fool the demon, as Frieren had taught her. But even with this reveal, we see the urgency Fern has in her life, as she had to train hard to have this much mana at such a young age. This fight perfectly illustrates the weakness of Immortality. In both the battle and in life, Fern has a more focused mindset and is willing to take risks that lead to success. The demon was slow and cautious because he has the possibility of thousands of years ahead of him. However, this is not a show that puts a theme or message above its world and story. Through these concepts, we see that Frieren, beyond Journey's End, never teaches that immortality is a bad thing. The long-living beings of this world never complain about their lifespan. Instead, the message of Frieren is simple, but extremely meaningful and profound. The amount of time isn't as important as the quality of time. For when you face an enemy that has more experience than you can still win. And the 10-year adventure with friends can mean more than the hundreds of years you spent without them. Even if you have all the time in the world, those around you don't. This leads to the aspect that personally hit me the hardest. Nothing felt more real to me in this anime than its portrayal of dealing with distant loss. Frieren has a melancholic sadness all throughout its story, starting with the first episode where we see the breaking of the hero's party and the subsequent death of Himmel the hero. Although in later episodes the show doesn't focus as heavily on the sadness of the situation, there are still constant reminders of the deaths of Himmel and Heiter, along with the loss of the short time the party had to spend together. We are constantly shown how Frieren carries all of this with her throughout her life. The most interesting part of this theme is that it barely deals with the immediate feelings of heartbreak and loss. We've seen this 1,000 times in every movie and TV show ever. Death is a powerful concept, and it is often utilized because it creates the highest stakes, along with bringing intense emotional feelings to the audience. Deaths often cause major changes within the story. Obi-Wan's death removes a mentor for Luke, who now no longer has a guide to help him. It puts more emphasis on Luke being the new hope and the only hope. In a story like Gurren Lagann, an important character's death drastically changes the entire direction of the story. If those people stayed alive, the main character would have had a much easier time accomplishing their goals, and the plot would have been more simple and straightforward. But the incredible thing about Frieren that makes the loss so uniquely meaningful is that once Himmel dies in the first episode, Frieren's life goes back to normal. She still wanders through the countryside learning new spells. She still goes into towns and finds places to sleep. She still does her shopping in markets like she always has. The only thing that truly changed is that she can't see her old friend again. This is the most tragic thing about loss. Losing someone like Himmel, a close friend or family member, in many cases doesn't directly affect your day-to-day life at all. Unless you are dependent on that person in some physical way, life moves on as normal. You still go shopping, you still go to work, you still do the things you care about like you always have. The death of Himmel in this story isn't just for a simple plot reason. Frieren hadn't even seen him for 50 years, and there was nothing different about her life whatsoever after he died. But despite the lack of change around her, it changed her. For no other reason than valuing a friend, the death of Himmel was one of the biggest life-altering moments for Frieren. As we go on, there isn't a focus on the sadness from death, which is exactly why the concept of distant loss is so prevalent throughout it. In the first weeks, months, and even years in some cases after a death, a person's mind can be constantly dwelling on that loss, constantly feeling the pain from it. After time, the pain fades, but something still remains. Melancholy is too strong of a word for it, but it's close to the idea that Frieren explores, and the feeling many of us carry through each day. Although the feelings are complicated, the reason is simple: memories. This is interwoven throughout the entire story. In almost every episode, we see flashbacks of how Himmel dealt with each situation. Through his choices, he influenced how Frieren makes decisions in the present. But it's not merely information Frieren learned a long time ago, it was a way of life. Himmel's philosophy about his limited lifetime affected Frieren years after. The things he did and the way he cherished those he loved had more meaning than just making the people around him feel good at the time. Frieren honors her fallen companion throughout the story. The entire purpose of her journey is to learn more about humans and cherish her relationship with them as Himmel did. The reason Frieren is more than just sad, why the deaths have such importance, is that it doesn't focus on the death and loss, but what comes after it. The initial feelings of happiness and warmth from their time together are gone, but the residual effect of Himmel's life still lives on through Frieren and the many other people who are saved or helped by him. We see this in the latest episodes as of this recording, when Frieren happily explores a dangerous dungeon. She finds every secret and enjoyed doing it as Himmel had done during their 10-year adventure. This brought joy not just to Frieren, but also to Fern, who appreciated seeing her master happy. While the loss of Himmel changed Frieren in such a profound way, I would never argue that death is a good thing, and this story doesn't either. It also doesn't relish in the misery or manipulate you to feel sad. It simply deals with it, and that is the beautiful way Frieren explores the concept of dealing with distant loss. From this aspect, Frieren teaches to appreciate the lives of those we've lost. Learning from who they were and affecting others through the lessons we learned from the dead makes them live on forever. This concept of living forever and the meaning of living a good life is not only shown in a metaphorical way, as I have just described, but also in a literal way. The last aspect of this theme is the idea of an afterlife. While I believe in the soul and existence after death, you might not. However, this anime's perspective on the subject is fascinating regardless of what you believe. As all the best stories do, Frieren doesn't push an agenda, but instead shows the perspectives of all the characters. In episode 11, Frieren talks to Kraft, another elf even more ancient than her. When Frieren asks him why he believes in the goddess of creation, as she had only shown herself once in all the history of the world, Kraft doesn't answer with undeniable proof or perfect logic. Instead, it's a deeply emotional expression of love and longing. He had been a righteous hero over a millennia ago, but all of those who had known about him had died. In the end, the only meaning left for him was the goddess saying, "Well done, you lived a fantastic life," paralleling the parable of the talents in Matthew 25, in which Jesus gives the line, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Frieren had a similar conversation with Heiter years earlier. At the time, he had praised her for the admirable things she had done, as she didn't believe in the goddess and that she would receive praise after death. This whole scene really shows the quality, depth, and intention put into the writing. This part could be taken as a humanistic philosophy, that whether it be God or a friend, having those around you that praise you and care for you is most important. But it immediately flips it on its head, as Kraft says, "You have good friends, you should cherish them." And Frieren replies, "He's in heaven now." She can't rely on the admiration of a human for her life's meaning. But the final layer is added with Kraft's final line of the scene, "Then you'll see him again someday." The scene ends with hope. The concept of heaven brings special meaning to everything in life. If your actions now have ramifications for eternity, then cherishing those around you and doing your best in every situation means infinitely more than just influencing those around you. And even that, as we explored in the first part of this video, does have a lot of power that can linger far after you are gone. Seeing those again who you've lost and being with them for eternity is a supreme hope and comfort, even if it doesn't change the pain, melancholy, and lessons learned in the present. Another fascinating part of this discussion is Kraft saying that the goddess must exist because it would be too cruel for her not to. It's a fascinating concept because it pertains not just to the existence of heaven or a deity, but also to the mindset and philosophy of the characters. The kind of hope, peace, and enthusiasm Kraft has is infectious, whereas Frieren is just beginning her journey to better connect with those around her and enjoy her life in a more full way. Which, in the end, is the main point of Frieren. If you're interested in learning more about God or heaven, you can always find the Bible and other religious texts and literature online that teaches about it. I always recommend learning and understanding more about what you believe, along with how others believe as well. The way this story explores loss, death, and hope is beautiful. So many scenes have an incredible level of depth and meaning to them. The concept of dealing with distant loss and finding hope after death is what meant the most to me. But in this video, I have shown you, through all the important aspects of storytelling and themes, how a boring anime became fascinating, and a simple concept with a lot of heart and attention to detail became one of my favorite anime of all time. Thanks for watching this whole video. Check out one of my other videos here on the end screen, and subscribe for more. Let me know in the comments what you think of this video format with my previous 3 uploads. Consider becoming a member if you want to support me making more videos. That's all for now. Jamyo.